Welcome to Dare to be Legendary, a podcast brought to you by Daversa Partners. In this podcast, we'll be sitting down with some of the brightest minds in tech, the founders, the visionaries, the entrepreneurs, the executives, that all have one thing in common. They are the leaders of today that are entirely transforming the technology ecosystem as we know it. In each episode, our guests will share their journey, vision, and market expertise with us. They are the ones who dare to be legendary. Today, we're joined by special guest Susan St. Ledger. She is the president of worldwide field operations at Okta, but is also the prior CRO at Splunk and Salesforce. On this episode, Daversa's Jack Dunn guides the conversation around sales leadership, customer identity, and diversity across executive teams. I'm your host, Nicole, and let's get started.
It's such a pleasure for me to have you on here. You've been a really awesome friend of our firm. And I know there are going to be a lot of folks that are interested to hear your insights on how you think about leadership and how you've navigated your career and what's going on in the software ecosystem. You and I met in 2011, so 10 years ago now, during a process where we were recruiting you to Buddy Media. The impact you had at Buddy that was pretty quickly acquired back into Salesforce, the impact you then had as CRO of the Marketing Cloud at Salesforce. I think the journey from 20 billion to over 50 billion market cap up to 2016 when you joined Splunk as Chief Revenue Officer, quickly taking on the president role, taking that company from 6 billion to north of 20 billion market cap, and now recently joining Okta. You know, we're fortunate at Daversa to get to work with people like yourself. And I think also to get to work with the groundswell of talent who want to be the Susan St. Ledgers of 2030 and 2040. I've heard you speak in the past about growth mindset in the teams you build and how you navigate your career and how you select opportunities. And maybe with that framing, I thought it might be interesting just to start with why you joined Okta. And, Okta is a massive behemoth of a company and an incredible growth story. And I'm sure folks would be fascinated to hear a little bit about how you navigated that decision.
Sure. So, there's always two things I focus on, Jack, whenever I'm looking at an opportunity, and it's market opportunity and the people. I want to work with people I enjoy working with and people I can learn from. And, there has to be a massive market opportunity. As you and I have spoken about before, I'm a high growth junkie. I've never worked at a company that wasn't an incredibly high growth company. I think high growth affords just so much opportunity for personal growth as well as career growth. And so I can't imagine working somewhere that didn't have that. And that's why market opportunity is so important, because if you don't have a massive market opportunity, eventually the ability to be high growth will stop. And so, for Okta, certainly I see that massive high growth opportunity. So Todd and Freddie, the co-founders, we worked together at Salesforce years ago, and they had actually engaged me many years ago, pre-IPO, to try and come to Okta. And at that time, it probably wasn't the exact right time for me. But the net of it is, when Todd re-engaged me, at this point, about a year ago, he really just made me look at identity in a whole new way. And I think, everything has evolved so quickly in the modern world, in the cloud world, in the SaaS world, in the modern world, and the digital experiences. Identity is the only constant that sits between people and tech and technology. So anytime you're trying to connect technology and people, you need identity. And when you take a step back and just look at that big picture, you start to realize in every aspect of your daily life how identity is. Every time I go to my Tesla, or I get on an application on my iPhone, or I get online to buy gifts for my nieces and nephews, like, identity is at the center of all of it. And so it really is incredibly strategic. And that's what got me super excited, Todd's vision and where we're going to take this.
Very cool. And it was interesting to me. I was sort of trying to think about maybe overly simplified version of when you joined Splunk was sort of a cloud transition story, right?
Yeah.
And it seems to me that in some ways Okta is sort of going through this infrastructure to application stack story, or as you said, sort of going through thinking of identity as a privacy, security, compliance thing to just like the core way that we interact with all of the technology and the layers that we're using every day. How do you kind of think about that, and how does that affect how you think about go to market, those sort of company transitions as a leader?
Yeah. So for Okta right now, I think it's a very exciting time because, as you said, people think about identity and they think about it as security. And certainly that's a huge part of the play, right? Is making sure that we're seamlessly securing your applications and delivering an incredible employee experience. But the other side of it, of course, is customer identity. So there's employee, which is workforce and what Okta was traditionally known for. But a huge part of where Okta is going, and 25% of the business to date, is customer identity. And so if you think about customer identity being anything outside of your employee base, so whether it's B2B or whether it's B2C or B2B2C, and everybody now has to expose digital experiences in order to be effective as a company. So you have to expose digital experiences to your partners and your suppliers. You have to expose digital experiences to your consumers. And so that's customer identity. And so now you think about, workforce, the size of workforce, of course, is all knowledge workers. So that's a huge market. But now you sit there and say, okay, so Jack, you as an employee at any one time have one identity, right? So you are Jack Dunn at Daversa, right? But how many digital customer identities do you have? You have them with your bank. You have probably many retail. I'm sure you have Amazon. I'm sure you have Netflix. I'm sure. And so when you think about that market and the opportunity for the explosion of digital experiences, even now state and local governments and federal governments are going completely digital in the experiences as well. And so it's a market opportunity that I don't think people truly understand at this point, and we are super excited about it. And Okta was already 25% of our business, and then we went and acquired Auth0, which is really just accelerating. It's the only two modern suppliers of customer identity in the market. So massive opportunity. You can tell I'm a little excited.
Yeah, super cool. How long have you been there now? It's like not last fall. Is that when you joined?
Feb 1, I joined.
Okay, gotcha. So a quarter or so in. I'm always curious in search. We're often we're building teams. So there are occasions where we're engaged with a company over a year, 2 years, 3 years, and frankly, sometimes through multiple life cycles. So it's a longer relationship. But sometimes we put people into a role and then we don't get the debrief until like 4 or 5 years later. So like, here's what you thought the role was going to be. Here's what the original challenge or your mandate was. And then here's what you ended up doing and what we really focused on and what we achieved. I'd love to hear, what did you learn at Splunk? How did, your original mandate match up to what you ended up spending your time on? What did you really take away from that time?
Sure. I mean, Splunk was an incredible opportunity and great experience. Probably one of the hardest challenges you'll ever come across is trying to take an on-prem company to the cloud. And we're super proud of the work that we did there and that the team continues to do. I believe if I looked at their cloud growth, I think it's still around 80% in terms of the cloud growth numbers. So you look at it and say, like, it's $1 billion business, still growing incredibly quickly on top of the term subscription business. So it was really multiple facets that we had to attack. First, we had to go from being a perpetual company to being a subscription company. So just the overall business model, getting to a subscription model, and at the same time, trying to drive as much to the cloud as possible. And so at this point, I think it's about 60% cloud. And like I said, the cloud number is growing at, I still think it's somewhere around 80%. I haven't checked in the last quarter or so, but very, very exciting growth. So that was really the big heavy lift was to get that focused. It was a huge mindset shift, right? For people who had never sold cloud and, to align every metric of the company around a different business model. So there was a business model change. There was a technology change. And so every aspect of the business was going through massive change every single year because it was a phased approach. So probably the greatest amount of change I've ever seen over the course of, 4.5 years within my career. So lots of change, but really, really exciting, challenging, and rewarding all at the same time.
Yeah. I think I'm right in saying you joined Splunk as CRO and then became president fairly quickly, or was it
Correct.
CRO president from the start?
Yeah, no, it was CRO to start.
Okay, gotcha.
I think Doug and I had talked about, the best approach being for me to come in and earn my stripes with my peers before he made me president. And I think it was a really good call on his part, and it worked out really well. So by the time I became president, I had established that trust and respect with my peer group.
Makes sense. And that journey is obviously sort of a classic enterprise software story, right? Like the revenue leadership to professional president, CEO, beyond that track into general management. Did you find that that was a substantive transition about how you spent your time and what you focused on? And maybe how would you coach people who are looking to make that, whether it's CRO to president or even just a sales leader to more of a general manager type of mindset within a company? How do you think about that transition? What surprised you about it? What did you struggle with?
Yeah, so I think it's generally a big transition in that you spend most of your time at that point on cross-functional alignment, right? So, certainly I had go-to-market, cross-functional alignment that I had worked hard on in the time that I had been there. But really, I think the big shift was taking on a lot of the cross-functional company alignment, whether it be, G&A to go-to-market, whether it be product and go-to-market. I was already very close with product, but I think we took it to whole new levels where we looked at everything from how do we improve cost to serve? How do we improve cost to sale? And so we took on some big meaty projects as we were going through that transformation to really make sure the company was all aligned and going in the right direction. And so that was probably the biggest shift that I saw. Certainly still paid attention to the deals and the numbers and spent a lot of time with customers. But certainly there's a bit of a shift where you also spend more time internally as well.
I've heard you describe yourself as a pacer before. I feel like that style, as I understand it, certainly is well suited to sales in a revenue environment. Did you find you had to balance that as you assumed a leadership role over other functions? How did you manage that?
Yeah, I think anytime. So let me just take a step back. It's pace setter, and it's not my word. Actually, it's not my label. It comes from my favorite leadership book, which is The Multipliers, written by Liz Weissman. Liz is, renowned in the industry. She's an incredible thought leader when it comes to leadership. I had the incredible fortune when I was at Splunk to actually be able to hire her as an executive coach. And I had reached out to her because I was such a huge fan of her work. So she agreed to do it. And that was just a masterclass in leadership as far as I'm concerned. She's just a great talent. And so really where it comes from is her book is about, multipliers and diminishers. And multipliers, of course, are, it's the type of leader you want to be where you're getting the best out of everybody and you're multiplying the impact. Whereas a diminisher is the leader who has to be the smartest person in the room and shuts everybody down, doesn't get the best out of their people because everybody knows in the end, they're going to be the one to provide the answer. So that's, super simplistic. But what happens is even if you're a multiplier, everybody has traits that are what they call accidental diminishers. And so really understanding what your accidental diminishers are is critical to you being a successful leader because nobody's perfect, right? And we're all going to have these. And so when Liz started working with my team and I at Splunk, she worked, with me, but part of that was getting to know my team and seeing how we work through meetings and things like that. And that was kind of if I had to point to my biggest accidental diminisher, it's being a pace setter. And so what you have to do is make sure that as you're out in front, that you're really being conscious about how far behind people are. Are you bringing them along with you or are you moving too fast? Because if you're moving too fast and you're not bringing people along, then, it creates this gap and it's frustrating to them. And quite frankly, they don't want to follow and they give up. And so I think it aligns very nicely with the concept that I've always said, which is, I want people to follow me genuinely, not because I said so. And so that means you have to put in a lot of extra work to explain the why we're doing things, to make sure that you're listening to opposing opinions and really collaborating so that it's not just because I said so.
How do you think about when you're finding those people? I guess giving credit to your recruiters here that anyone that's getting to you, right, is well pedigreed and probably well referenced and to a certain extent, maybe a somewhat known quantity in industry. When you were meeting somebody in that capacity as a candidate or interviewing somebody, What are you focusing on? What does that session look like normally?
Sure. Yeah, I think to your point, Jack, generally by the time somebody's in front of me, they've been well vetted in terms of their craft, whether it's marketing or whether it's sales or whether it's customer success or whatever it is. But I think, the thing that I like to focus on is mindset. So we talked about the growth mindset. What does that really mean? I want people who are learners. I want them to always be learning. I want them to continuously be focused on improving. So I always say, like, every quarter we celebrate, we hit the numbers, we celebrate, but the next meeting needs to be a look back to say, let's use hindsight to say, knowing what we know now, what would we have done differently? And I expect that to be a constant rhythm for anybody on my leadership team. And then lastly is being comfortable being uncomfortable. So that's the concept of growth mindset from my lens. So I look for intellectual curiosity and intellectual capacity. I'll ask people, what's the last major thing that you had to learn and how did you go about learning it? And sometimes it's obvious because people have pivots on their resume where they went from, selling one thing to selling something that was completely different, or they went from being on the SE engineering side to sales side or whatever. And sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it's not. So really dragging that out and making sure that you have somebody who's a learner and who doesn't require certainty, because in a high growth environment, certainty is the last thing that you're going to have. And so the other big thing I look for at the executive level is, are you a builder? Do you know how to fix things? And have you driven transformation? So over the course of, if you're at a high growth company for years, you're going to have times where you're building. You're going to have times where you're fixing things that, maybe aren't on track. And then you're going to have times where you're driving massive transformation. And so I look for, examples of people who have done all of those things, because many times people can run things, but it doesn't mean they can build. It doesn't mean they can fix. It doesn't mean they can transform. So I look for those very discrete things. And then lastly, depending upon what we're selling, it's like, if I talked about, this customer identity market is fairly new in the way it's being done. And so I consider it a market creation opportunity. And I always, in sales, when I'm looking for sales executives, I always look for people who have done market creation as well as market replacement, because they're very, very different. And, if I look at, as an example, when I went to Salesforce, CRM was a replacement market. The money was a budget line item. People were already spending hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars on it. However, SaaS was a market creation. And so it took a very different skill set to be able to go sell SaaS to people who said it was never going to work in the enterprise. So that market creation thing is very important to me as well for my executive leadership team.
Could you double click on that? I mean, tell me about, if you're talking to a senior sales leader, what do you think the hallmarks are, mindset or approach wise, if there are things that you're looking for? And I suppose that CRM versus SaaS comparison is a really good one, because sometimes it is subtle, right? Like whether a market's going through a transformation or a replacement or a new category creation, new market creation. How do you evaluate whether somebody has in fact gone through that type of process, or if they're, because people get coached on how to package themselves for certain roles, right? Like, or if they have been able to shift the narrative a little bit and say, oh no, like what we were doing was new under the sun when I was at X company. How do you push people on that? Or what do you think the hallmarks are of people who have really done that?
Yeah, so if you think about what it takes for market creation, the big thing is it takes a lot more leading the customer and a lot more explanation to the customer about what the technology does and what business problems it's going to solve. So if I flip your question on its head, I'll start with, like, if somebody sold Oracle database their whole life, they didn't have to explain what Oracle database was, right? I'm not saying they aren't a good seller, but I'm saying I'm going to really have to probe there, right? Because they didn't have to go explain and create that opportunity, like Oracle database, right? Yeah, maybe they, competed against, SQL or whatever, but the net of it is Oracle database is a well-known product and has been for a lot of years. Same with Microsoft Office, right? Nobody has to explain what Microsoft Office is, right? And so I look at that and say, if that's all you sold, then I'm going to be probing. Whereas if you have something on your resume, I'm like, what was that technology, right? And how did you go about selling that? That's one, like actually have them explain the value proposition to me. And then the second thing is that I would also ask them to do it for multiple buyers. So generally speaking, technology often has multiple buyers, right? So again, getting back to Okta and customer identity, the buyer could be the CMO, the buyer could be the chief digital officer, the buyer could be the CTO, it could be the CIO, or it could be the CISO. Like it's all over the map. And how you sell to each of those people is very different. And so very often my interviews will also focus on audience and who you're selling to and make you sell me the same thing to many different audiences.
I don't want this to turn too much into just like, this is how you prep for an interview with Susan podcast. But how do you like to see people talk about stories that weren't successful, right? I'm always trying to parse through working with a lot of folks who have spent their career in startups, the likelihood that people have a run that wasn't a big win, right? Or whatever part of it never quite got there. What do you think the right mindset is, or what are the things you look for in somebody who maybe hasn't jumped from strength to strength? Every stint in their career is a win and the company grew massively or had a big exit. What do you look for people to take away from struggles or failure?
So the number one thing is don't be a victim. So own whatever it is that was the struggle and don't, like, if I see people blaming others or the circumstance and not having any insight maybe on what part of it they own. So I think I have like zero tolerance for a victim mentality about everything that happened to them or why they couldn't be successful. But so what I love to see is just, the opposite of that, which is, hey, like, I'm really glad this happened because here's what I learned from it. And whether it's I learned that it wasn't really a market, there are a lot of startups that are features. They're not a market. And so distinguishing between like, did I pick the wrong company? And if I did, that's fine. We're all going to make mistakes. But then what did I learn from the fact that I picked the wrong company, right? And why was it the wrong company? Was it the market opportunity? Was it the people? And so really it's, what did you learn from, in hindsight? Use hindsight and tell me what you learned. Hindsight's 2020. I don't know why we all don't use it a whole lot.
I appreciate also when I'm talking to folks and they say, like, I just misread this market, or I overestimated what the size of this was going to be, or I didn't quite understand the customer when I joined. And I suppose I'm most curious about difficult feedback that you received that really stuck with you, or particularly if it was things that, like, I was told this and it took me, I found in my own career, like, sometimes feedback, it doesn't really hit you until a year or two later, and it finally clicks that is what that person was trying to tell me, and that's why this is important. Are there things that really stick with you from your own career that you've learned the most from that standpoint?
Sure. I'll touch on two, both of which turned out to be monumental in my career. So early on in my first management job, I was asked to build two different pre-sales engineering teams. So I was a pre-sales engineering leader at the time at Sun Microsystems. And I remember after I'd built both teams in a very short period of time, probably about 6 months, I got this really nice award, and the sales leaders were like thrilled with the quality of the SEs I had brought in. And the VP of sales at the time, Joe Womack, he basically pulled me aside and said, yeah, that's all great, except you have one diverse candidate in the 12 people that you hired. And this was early 90s, right? So it wasn't something people focused on, and it wasn't something I was taught as a leader. And the way I just put it was very nice. He was actually very hard on me. He basically took me to the woodshed and said, you're not looking at this the right way. And what we talked about, of course, was, initially my reaction was, oh, well, this was the candidate pool and blah, blah. He's like, so work harder, go cast a broader net. And I think he gave me a very early lesson in diversity that played out, throughout my career, that it's not just a nice to have, but that it is a business imperative. And, the good news is that there are studies on it now. There's data now that shows that, whether it be gender or, underrepresented minorities or whatever, we need diversity in the workplace, diversity of thought. And it's really, really important. And so that one stuck with me, and I learned it very early on. And it is hard. You have to cast a really wide net to make sure that you're always including diverse candidates. So that's one. The second one was when I worked at Salesforce and had a lot of engagement with Mark Benioff. And, no matter what we did in terms of the next size deal, he always just moved the bar. Right. And so wherever we were, he always told us he would have expected it to be even further. And he did it in a way that he not only changed your mindset to how big the opportunity was, but I think I watched him do it for me personally and for many others. And so now I think it's a skill set that I have, which is, helping shape other people's mindset, especially when it comes to big thinking or understanding how big the opportunity can be. And the way that I think about it now in hindsight is, your belief system comes from your experiences, right? So when I first, I was at Sun when it was, whatever billion plus and went to 22 billion, right? I saw explosive growth there. But then I got to Salesforce and I saw it was just incredibly explosive growth from 120 million to 8.5 billion. And of course, I was more senior at the time. And so, much closer to exactly how everything was happening. And so that now, Sun, Salesforce, now that's part of my belief system, right? I get to Splunk and it wasn't necessarily part of the belief system, right? The growth had been slowing a little bit and we changed the trajectory of the growth. And the hardest part about that was getting people to believe and getting them to understand, because the market opportunity was there. We just needed to get to the subscription model and understand the benefits of that. So those would be the two things that I would point out. But that mindset and changing people's mindsets is truly a gift if you can do it. And I'm grateful every day for, the lessons I learned from Mark on that front.
Yeah. In reference to kind of diversity, equity, inclusion, how do you think about, I'm sure Okta has standards from a recruiting angle in terms of goals, in terms of diversity of talent pool. Do you have personal heuristics that you push your managers on? Because obviously there's diversity of talent pool, then there's what do you actually end up with in terms of the diversity of your leadership team and the broader diversity at every level of your company, right? Are there things you push your team on specifically that you think either expand on or deviate from Okta standards or industry standards at all?
Yeah, so I'm only one quarter into Okta, so we have more to do there. So maybe it's more important to talk about, since I was at Splunk a long time and I was able to have an impact on that. What we did at Splunk was to set goals and publish the numbers, right? And I think when you publish the numbers, you hold yourself accountable as a management team. And so, there was some great work done there we started with gender diversity and then moved to underrepresented minorities. But I think that what I've told my team in the short period at Okta is let's make sure that every rec that we open, every requisition that we open for a candidate, we at least make sure we have diverse candidates amongst the population, right? So it's kind of a crawl, walk, run in terms of how we think about it. But that's the first step, is making sure that for each of the open recs, that you make sure that you're casting a wide net in terms of getting diversity candidates to interview. But I think it's a muscle we need to spend a lot more time on at Okta, and not surprising just given the stage of the company.
Yeah, of course, and we all do. I'd love to talk about Hashicorp and your role there. I'm sure you get called on a lot of board opportunities. I'd love to talk about, why you chose that board, what the connective tissue was, and then just kind of what you try and bring to the table as a board member.
Sure. So board's no different than when I'm looking at an opportunity, same level of diligence, and it's about market opportunity and the people. So just to be, I guess, a bit repetitive with what I said earlier, that really is the most important thing. And so when I look at the market opportunity for Hashicorp, I think it's truly mind blowing. They are, a tier one partner for, every aspect of the public cloud. So all three of the major public cloud providers, obviously with Azure, AWS, and Google. And, the value proposition that they bring is to make sure that as you're operating across multiple clouds, which everybody wants a multi-cloud environment, right? Nobody wants to be dependent upon one cloud provider. They make everything work seamlessly, as opposed to doing provisioning one way on Microsoft and a second way on Google and a third way on AWS, with, of course, provisioning just being one example. They have an entire portfolio of products that allows you to neutrally work across all of the public cloud providers. And I think that's just anybody who's going to have that level of participation in a multi-trillion-dollar economy, public cloud economy. I think it's incredible. And then the second thing I would say is it's the people, right? And so Armand and Mitchell, who are the co-founders, incredibly impressive, incredibly humble. And so, what they've done, particularly at their age, is truly astonishing. And the humility that they have was truly attractive to me. And then, of course, Dave McJenna, who is the CEO, is just, he was a huge part of the appeal as well throughout the process. So it's been a great selection, and I'm really glad that I made that choice.
And how do you think about that board role in terms of, obviously you're not as in it day to day as you would be in a full-time role? Like how do you think about what you can bring from that slightly higher level perspective? How have you approached that?
So it's one of the reasons that I wanted to do, an earlier stage company that was, gearing itself up for a future, IPO event, and that was going to need to scale. I think the probably the biggest thing that I bring is just an understanding of scale, and going from being, a smaller company to being a multi-billion-dollar company, and that's what I hope, I can really help with from a go-to-market perspective at Hashicorp. So the way that I was involved in the hiring of their CRO, Brandon Sweeney, has done a great job. And, he knows that I am here for anything he needs. So generally we meet once or twice a quarter, and then as needed. So like just yesterday, he reached out, hey, I could use some time talking about, this particular topic. And so it's really, very advisory, but not afraid to roll my sleeves up and take a look at, anything he wants me to take a look at, whether it be, the go-to-market segmentation, the overall strategy, or some of the data in terms of what they're seeing from a performance perspective. So it's been a lot of fun. And again, it's a privilege to be asked to join a board like Hashicorp for sure.
Fantastic. And I'd be curious to hear, you get approached or have been approached many times on companies that are making that exact transition from very promising early growth, whatever that revenue trajectory or headcount number is, to scale, maybe in terms of either the pitfalls you're helping Hashi avoid, or what you look out for. What do you think founders, CEOs, or CROs misunderstand about what the shift is in that journey?
Yeah, so not specific to Hashi, but across the board, because I've done I've done quite a bit of advising, helping other companies as well. And also just have had, friends who have been in that position. So I think the biggest thing that I see is that too often people have a loyalty factor that maybe when they have a particular leader who has reached their limits of scale, they're afraid to make a move, right? Because that person has put so much into the company and they've been a huge part of the success. I would say that that's probably the biggest pitfall I see, is that, sometimes the person who took you from, 0 to 200 million is not the same person who can take you from, 200 million to multiple billions. And I think you just have to be realistic about that. And I definitely see companies across the board that wait a little too long to make those moves sometimes. The other thing is just, the operation rigor and cadence.
Yeah, and that rigor, that infrastructure, is that in terms of like your go-to-market cadence? You think a lot of companies are a little loose at that stage?
Yeah, especially if you have a great product market fit. Like great product market fit and hitting the numbers can hide a lot. And so, what I would encourage founders, CEOs to do is make sure they're looking under the hood even before they need to. So it's great when you have an incredible tech with an incredible product market fit, but, make sure that you're not just, moving on every quarter because you're hitting the numbers, but, looking at all of the trends underneath. Look at the data, look at the productivity, look at the pipe gen, look at the pipe coverage, look at the trends are super important. Because as you're scaling, everything's going to get a whole lot harder. And so the bigger you get, the harder it gets because the numbers are bigger. And you have to make sure that machine is truly tuned and ready to go before you get there.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. The great product market fit or the great product can be a millstone around your neck in terms of like really ironing out the go-to-market. Maybe I'll leave you, Susan, just with a broader question, because I'm sure a lot of the people who are going to listen to this are folks to whom you're a legend and they're sort of building their career in, in any function in software, but particularly on the go-to-market side of the house. What advice would you give to somebody in the early stages of building a career in software on the go-to-market side of the world today? And whether that's make sure you don't overlook this trend, whether it's about how they think about work, how they think about broadening their skill set. What do you tell people just starting out?
Jack, I have a framework that I created called the career bucket list. And the gist, that's a 45-minute talk in and of itself. But the gist of it is, if you be a business leader, don't just be a sales leader. And so, very often people can be, great at selling, and they can be, understand how to forecast. But in the end, there are so many dials of the business that really matter across all functions. And so what I would say is, when I look at my career, it's a jungle gym. It's not a ladder. It wasn't just, one step up right after the other. And I really did learn all of the dials of the business. And some of that was serendipitous when I got to be the chief of staff for the CEO and president at Sun Microsystems for Scott McNally and Xander. That was obviously an incredible opportunity for me to really understand how a company is run. But then I continued to build on that, right? So having started in engineering, moved to sales, I took a step out of sales to go run customer success so I could truly understand how that function worked and have true P&L experience as opposed to just watching it from the outside. But generally speaking, what I would say is understand all the dials of the business, listen to earnings calls, listen to multiple earnings calls for different companies at different phases and understand the nuances of what each company is up against. Because I think just too often, go-to-market leaders generally come from the sales side. The president role generally comes from the sales side. And too often, the experience isn't well-rounded enough to really understand all of the dials. So do you understand the importance of an ecosystem and how all that works? Do you have the international experience? Have you done market creation? There's all these different buckets, if you will. And so I think that the breadth and depth matters is probably the way I would phrase it.
It sounds like you proactively sought those opportunities. I think there's more interoperability and, you see people going product into go-to-market or CS side of the house, maybe into direct sales or large enterprise selling, and then they start leading a team. And I completely agree that those often are the strongest leaders. Thank you so much for making time for this.
Thanks, Jack. It was a pleasure. It was great to see you.
Thanks for listening to Dare to be Legendary, brought to you by Daversa Partners. Feel free to check out the show notes for resources that we've mentioned throughout the episode. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, share with friends, and leave us a review. This helps us get content to more listeners like you. Thanks again, and stay tuned for our next episode.